Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Book to Block, a series where I bring my fantasy novel to life in Minecraft, one block at a time. In today's episode, The Waterfall. Alright, here we are by the waterfall marker that we made in the planning episode, that was a couple episodes ago. We marked that around this area we want the waterfall. I think I chose it because of how sharp these cliffs are, so how flat they are from going straight up. So I'll choose one of these gaps in here, depending on where I put the water up top, and that'll come down, and I'll have to clear out a way for it to come over these mountains here, and then make its way into the river, which will head over into this lake over here. So the first thing we want to do is mark off the area where the water will be held up here in the mountains. So we'll have to close off some areas, so raise up some bits to kind of hold it in, because we don't want a lake up here that is going to be covering everything. We want it to be nice and controlled, that can hold enough water to supply the waterfall realistically, or as realistically as we can get for Minecraft. And then we can kind of have an area that's around it, because I also mentioned that we're going to have a forest around this area that the main character will make its way through. So let's plan our area and then we'll see how the water looks in that. Alright, so I've switched out of my shaders for now, just because we're going to be doing a lot of block placements and I want it to run a little bit more smoothly. So I'm going to be using Axiom, and we'll be using the flood fill command. So first I'm going to grab a block. I'm not going to use water, I'm going to use just blue for now, just so that it can place it a little bit easier without me having to worry about any flooding anywhere. So as you can see, this is where it's going to be placed. So I'm going to start by placing up to here. So you can see this is kind of how it's starting. I'm then going to go over and choose the location that I want the water to flow out of. So since this is kind of the lowest area here, I'm going to work from here. So I can kind of draw the lines. So I want the waterfall in this area. I'll worry about it coming down to the lake a little later. I just need to get it to this point first. Since this is much higher than basically any of this over here, I'm going to lower this down a little bit. So I'm going to use the elevation, turn it to lower, and then kind of just bring it down a little bit. It's going to get rid of my texturing, but I can add that back in a little bit later. Looks like it's damaging my label here, but we have to do this anyways, so I can bring that back later. So looking at this is kind of where the water level has to be. And looking, it's going much higher than any of this. Check over here. Over here I can raise this up a little bit, and that will block off any way of it escaping. I can fill in this hole, no problem. Let's lower this front bit a little bit more. I'll lower the radius. Go into lower. Alright. So this is the level to work with. So we'll go around and check any area, make sure that it's below. Looks good here. It can go back there, no problem. It's trapped over here as well. Alright, so now I just need to work on this area over here. So I'm going to raise up this, and come back from the edge here, and just raise up this entire area. Alright, and then we can check on the progress by going back to the flood fill, and just adding layer by layer, making sure it doesn't escape anywhere. So you now see here the side on the right side here, that's what it would fill. So I can see that this is going to be the problem down here. So if it went up one more, it would flow into everything else. I think we'll just go up a couple more, so I'll have to raise that up a little bit. Alright. back to flood fill. Let's take a look. And there we go. So now it's going off here. So I kind of want to make a little dam. So I'll just grab a block that won't be affected. All right. So if I look like this, nothing outside the area is going to be filled. So I can click that. So I think this is a good enough area. This will be brought back, so we don't want this here. So I'll have to remove this, put it back to empty air for that. But then after it comes through here, this will be where the waterfall is. So what we can do now, we can use a mask. So anything that's blue concrete, I'll select it here. Just to show a little test. And then we're going to use the replace, so Control R. So we click on blue concrete and then water. So it didn't quite catch the bottom bit, so I'll just do that again. Concrete, water. So this is kind of the water area for now. So you can see it's not escaping anywhere. There's a couple areas that I missed that I'll have to redo. But I think this is a good amount of water to supply the waterfall. Alright, so back over into the shaders now. You can see obviously the water looks a lot better. I've left the entrance to the waterfall untouched for now because I don't want the water spilling out. But thinking about kind of getting the texturing of the bottom with the texture pack, with the shaders, the water makes it hard to see the bottom anyways. So if we come off the shaders, now you can see the bottom. So if you're going at it without the shaders, this looks very weird. You can it just looks like the mountain has water on it instead of it being a long lake that's had the water here and it's affected the materials underneath. So we're going to have to come up with a palette for different areas, for the different depths of this area, and then paint it how we want it to look. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm going to use this kind of complex mask. So I basically want to just replace the edge of the top layer. So if I click here, it selects the whole edge because it's beside any of these blocks, which is the palette here. It's at the Y level of the water level, and it's water because I don't want to select the inside. So I'm going to replace this with the blue concrete. So now if I go down here, you can see the level here. And then after that, I'm going to move this down. And then for all the water, so deselect this, and then remove the water. Go around and make sure it's all good. So that's all been removed. So now I can work on the palette of these blocks while still knowing where the water level should go. So I can stop before I do anything towards this. Alright, so for kind of a block palette, I'm thinking 3 stages. So the deepest, the mid area, and then the shallowest area sort of near the water's edge. So I'm thinking of doing it kind of like how I did these mountains with the deep slate, tough, and then stone. So for the deepest part, we're going to go with deep slate and then the smooth basalt. They kind of work well together. And then I'm going to have gravel kind of spread out randomly just as like a little accent, maybe on top or just mixed in with these. For the mid section, I'm going coarse dirt and then the tough, and then clay as the same way I'm doing the gravel for the deep parts, just kind of little pockets of it throughout. And then for near the kind of water's edge or surface, I'm going to be using stone and then the mud, sort of like the dirt's turned into mud from contact, and then gravel again, just kind of spattered around the edge. I might also add in a bit of sand, but since this is kind of up in the mountains, it doesn't really get to a beachy kind of thing, so I might just stick with this palette here. Alright, so now we're back here in the lake pit. You got the border showing the water level that I'll bring back in later. So now we're going to go in with our palettes and kind of paint around this area. So I'm going to do deepest parts are kind of like this area, and then there's one over here that goes quite deep. The shallow bits will be about 10 blocks from the surface. We'll kind of not an exact line, it'll be messy. And then everything in between will be the mid-level, so the coarse dirt and tough. So what I'm going to do in Axiom, I'm going to do a noise painting of the 2 blocks, and then later on I'll come back in with the gravel and clay and just do little pockets everywhere, because I don't want it to be just little bits everywhere. I want condensed pockets. So we'll first go in. So you can see I'm using a mask of less than the water level just to make sure it doesn't paint anything else. We'll go in. It doesn't have to be exactly 10 blocks deep because I can replace this with the mid-level later on. So let's paint the edge of the shallow area. Alright, so we got the shallow area. Maybe missing a couple, so I'll have to go back in, make sure there's no greenery left underneath for now. So now we can go for the mid-level. So that would be the tough and the coarse dirt. Alright, and then that's the mid-level. So now we'll come in with the deep and then add that into the bottom. Alright, so I picked all the deepest areas and kind of gave them the dark area. So just a little points like this, and then this deep hole, as well as the main area here. So what I'm going to do next is kind of do like a merge in between. Kind of like how I did these mountains, where I did 3 layers of the deep slate, the tough, and then the stone at the top. And then in the middle areas, I painted with a mix of the 2 layers. So in between the deep slate and tough, I did a noise painting of deep slate and tough, just to make sure it's not like a solid line. So starting on this bottom one, we'll do this. So we're going to add in the coarse and the tough. And if we do this, it kind of puts it on top and bottom of each other. So I can go along the edge and make it a little bit smoother throughout this area. I can kind of use the top of the deep area, the darker, the deep slate, and the basalt kind of as a line to work with. And then looking at these ones, this is also a little too sharp, so now mud and stone. And just kind of paint along the edge. Alright, so that's the main palette of it. So now we're going to go in with this gravel and clay. Just kind of make little deposits everywhere, just for a little bit more detail. So for this one, we're going to use the same noise painter. So we're going to start with the gravel. I'm going to add in just nothing, so that it's a 50% chance for it to be gravel, and then 0 for anything else. So you can kind of see it makes little deposits, but it's not a perfect shape. You can maybe change that up a little bit, add in different size deposits, just throughout, for a little bit more color and texture changing. Now do the same with clay, and we'll do that onto the midsection. So find little areas where clay would deposit, so kind of like at the bottom here. Since the clay is such a different color, you don't want to add too much of it, otherwise it'll stand out too much. Just kind of in these little pits. You want to add just little bits here and there, nothing too dense. Maybe over here. Just kind of where the clay would settle if this was like a natural lake. If any clay got landed in this area, it would settle to these kind of areas, not on the sharp edges. I said I would do clay or the gravel on the top. There aren't too many places. I'll just have to pick the highest peaks that'll have small little gravels. So you can see here, this kind of a ledge, we can add a bit of gravel, maybe over by the entrance or exit towards the waterfall. And just add a couple of these anywhere that it might work. Alright, so now that we've got the painting, we can now add back in the water. So we'll go back into the flood fill. we're going to make sure that we're using the blue concrete again. So I want to remove this so that I can click exactly on the level. Oh, looks like I had red selected for some reason. So now what we're going to do, we're going to smart select, block, into that. So now if we replace this with water. So like I said earlier, you can't see too much with the shader on because it makes it so dark at the bottom, but it does look a little bit better here along the edge. So I'm going to turn off the shaders, make sure we didn't miss any of that red concrete anywhere. Alright, now that we've got the texturing done, we can do a little bit more detailing. So I've picked out a couple things here, as you can see in my hotbar. So for the more shallow areas, we can kind of have a bit of greenery. You don't want too much since this is up in the high mountains. Eventually these will be kind of maybe snow-capped. So this won't be the most like habitable area for these kind of greeneries. So you just want to add a couple in, just here and there, just little patches along the edge here. And then for these lily pads, we can kind of one or two more on the edge, not too much in the center, because it wouldn't be as easy for them to survive that way. And then we can maybe add in some of these drip leaves. So find an area that works. So these kind of looks like growths that are floating to the surface, but aren't quite long enough to reach the surface quite yet. Just one or two of these here, making sure they're not in places where they'll break. So this adds a little bit more greenery there. As we go a little bit lower, we kind of have more dead things, so we can use these dead corals. I don't want too much color, so I didn't use the live ones. So just find a couple of these. I found that the tube, fire, and then tube coral, I like these ones. I kind of put them out and chose them, so kind of just a few of these here. You can barely see them from the surface, but not everything has to be visible for it to have a reason to be there. Then we can kind of add these pointed dripstones as little stalagmites or stalactites. Can't remember which one. But just a couple of these sort of mid to deep area. You can also add maybe some of these sea pickles. Just some at the shallow to mid region. Just a couple here or there. There's also kelp. So we can place a couple of these. Nice since they're animated. You can kind of want more of this area. So we don't want it to be too deep, and we don't want it to be on the shallow. So again, the mid area. Just place a couple of these here, and that'll add a bit more detail to this area. Alright, so now that the lake is done, time to work on the actual waterfall. So, like I said earlier, this kind of got shifted when I was adjusting, but we're going to have it come down this way. So we kind of have to make a little channel that's been made over the years. Maybe we can have it come down to here, have it a small pond here, and then a second waterfall down to here. Maybe clear out a path straight through here. And then, as you can see, this is where the river path was planned to be, so we're just gonna have to shift it over a little bit. So I'll terraform this and then we can see how the water flows. Alright, so we've added in the water path here, so you can see it comes down here in a big rushing place, lands kind of like into a little pond collection area for another smaller waterfall that flows. It kind of spilled into this area, filled in the gaps, and then into one tiny last little waterfall, and then into the river. So this will follow all the way through and towards the lake. So for the waterfall itself, with the shaders at least, it doesn't look the best. It'll turn them off. So without the shaders, it actually looks better because you can actually see the water compared to the cliffside itself. So if we want it to look good whilst in shaders too, because it's kind of invisible here, we'll have to add in a little bit of a backing so that it stands out a little bit more. Alright, so I did a bit of testing around in my test world, and I found that using the water for the waterfall itself just doesn't make any sense. Because if you look at any real photos of waterfalls, you can always see the white rapids of like the mist of the water on the falling part. I'll use water for like when the collection areas where it flows into here and holds, but for the different waterfalls, I think I'm going to go for the glass pane trick. So for this, it's using the glass panes because it creates kind of the depth of layers when you build on top of each other. It won't look the best when you're like right beside it, but because this isn't like a location that you would be traveling in this area itself, you'd only observe it from maybe down here or on one of the other mountains. You don't need to get as close. So for this, I'm going to turn on this fast place, and then I'm going to use infinite reach, and I'm kind of going to use it as just a paintbrush. So I can just paint in this area a little bit. So I'm going to go through here, and we can kind of see it adds up. And then I'm also going to use the light blue and then the dark blue as well, just to add a bit of color, and we'll see the final product from afar afterwards. Alright, so we got the waterfall in. So I used the white stained glass, light blue, and the regular blue. I also did an edge around here with a bit darker, which is the deep slate. I used it in here so it's a little harder to tell, but like it kind of gives like the moisture getting off of the water into the stone. I filled up these areas, have it a little lower so it kind of runs into here, into the second waterfall, and then comes down into the river, which I've started to work on. Down at the base, I kind of used floating bits of the stained glass and then the white candles, kind of as like the mist that comes off when it hits the water at the bottom. Over here, I replaced the bottom with mud just to get that darker color, just so it stands out a little bit more against the nice bright green. But I think with that, the waterfall is pretty much done, other than a couple of small details, adding more of the greenery towards the inside. I'll also adjust this a little bit more, maybe make it a bit deeper. And then after that, we can remove the label and move on to the next thing, which would be the river into the lake. But I think that's enough for today. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos coming soon. Until next time.